because I was looking in the chat and it seems like we have mostly a beginner level of knowledge. So I'm definitely going to try to explain things as best I can. And, you know, the nature of the workshop is like, it's difficult to show you like React and Firebase and just have everything be like, you know, oh, I can do this tomorrow, you know what I mean? But I think the real purpose of it is going to be like getting everything set up so like you could go look at this by yourself later on, and like you could get to that point where you can be like, yeah, I could do this, like, you know, tomorrow. And these are really powerful technologies that you're going to be able to use for, you know, hackathons. To get React is extremely employable when it comes to finding jobs and whatnot. It's very like very hot technology. So that's what you're going to use for both these. Node.js is going to be how we're doing all the different things that we need to do to interact with, you know, React in our web application. Console.firebase.google.com. If you have a Google account, it'll just let you log right in. It should, and it might make you go through like a certain setup process, but you don't have to enter any credit card information, which is good because I'm probably not the only person that's been burned by putting in credit card information to some kind of cloud platform thing and, you know, losing a lot of money. So. And these two are more optional: Visual Studio Code and also the GitHub student account. If you apply for it, you can get Bootstrap Studio, and that's going to be really helpful for people that just have never used HTML, never used CSS, you know, have never used JavaScript and stuff. That's really powerful. Bootstrap is this really nice set of technologies, or not set of technologies, UI framework more. So it makes your user interface look good on mobile phones, look good on regular desktops, and it's super helpful. So I'm going to give you a little demonstration of that too at some point. But without further ado here, in case anyone needs help installing stuff, I think that people can probably help you in the chat. I don't know how well I'm going to be able to maintain the chat. I kind of suck at looking at it, but I will try my best.
Yeah, Robert's on the call. Robert, our awesome workshops director, is on the call. So if you have any trouble with installation, Robert can help you. Just send him a private message in Zoom. And then of course, if you have any questions, we'll answer them as they come along in chat, and we'll read out the good questions. Not good questions, but we read out questions that everybody probably has on the call for everyone to hear.
Yeah, I'll try my best to take some breaks every once in a while just to let any of the confusion get a little bit figured out here. So there's an intro to React and Firebase. For those of you that don't know what either of these things are, let's start with React. React is a JavaScript library for building user interfaces. It was developed by Facebook, and that's a big thing because the fact that Facebook backs it and maintains it really well has gotten it. I think that it's coming close to being like an industry standard. There's also another framework called Angular that is backed by Google. But what I've found is that Angular is kind of that's not necessarily being phased out, because to some extent, people use it so much that it's just hard to remove it completely. But React is taking over. Like at my current job, where they're spending millions of dollars converting all of their code to be React code. So why is React so good? Why do people want to use it so much? Well, one is the concept of a virtual DOM. And for people that are completely unfamiliar with, you know, how websites work and stuff, basically this thing called a document object model. And that's kind of how your browser handles changes, handles things that happen on the browser. And a virtual DOM, I'm going to get into exactly what that is more later, and it's not really even something you need to know using React, right? But pretty much the reason that you'll do it is it gives you a huge performance increase. It can be a steep learning curve. So if I'm talking and it sounds like gibberish, it could be I'm explaining it poorly, but it could also just be React is a difficult topic. You know, it's really difficult to be able to get up to speed on it. But what you'll find is that if you take the time and you really try to understand the concepts and get in there, you don't even really necessarily need to understand Node.js or JavaScript extremely well to use it. It's kind of its own thing to itself, and you can start to understand those topics a little bit more. Like when I started using React, it was for an internship, and you know, it was definitely, I did not have the highest level of knowledge. And I'm going to try to move slowly here. If we don't get through all the material that I wanted to, that's totally fine. I just want to make sure that I'm kind of helping people understand it, you know, and trying to get everyone there. So companies using React: Airbnb, Facebook, Netflix, Uber, Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest, all of these companies are hiring for React. Very, very hot technology. What are the fundamental ideas of React? These are like the 5 tenets, I would say, that like are maybe not virtual DOM, but the rest are pretty important to understand if you want to, you know, be proficient in it. So what is a component? Let's just understand this like conceptually, because I know a lot of people don't really have the HTML and CSS background, and you know, the idea of like how web apps are usually made to understand it, but basically a component is like a self-contained reusable building block. So we can think of components like as functions. So if anyone is familiar with other programming languages, right, a function is something where you put something in, you get something back out. So same thing with a component. We break up our web interface into these little components that give us a predictable result back. Two primary types of components you'll see are class components and function ones. Function ones usually tend to, there's differences between the two, and I'll get more into that later as we talk a little bit more about the different concepts, but just understand that these are the two main types that you'll see. I think they're the only two types. And then we have lifecycle methods. So these are kind of things where, like, if you have a component on your screen, you know, sometimes we want that component to do something at different times. So every time that something happens on the page, when the page first comes up, we want the component to do something. When we make a change, we want the component to do something. So that's basically what lifecycle methods are. And here's an example. It's kind of hard to see the actual web page itself, but basically, as you can see, this is how you would break a regular web page up into different components. So this would be like for a railway station, right? And you would start here, and each one of these, as you see, there's like a pattern. There's just a predictability to it. Like for each line in the network of railway stations, we're gonna have this little thing that lets people click go and lets them do something with that station. So what we would do if we were just writing this with like regular HTML, you know, regular stuff that's just going to render it on the screen, we'd have to keep copying and pasting this over and over. And the only thing we'd really be changing, right, is this little title here, which doesn't really make sense. That kind of is redundant and doesn't help us build a really large scalable user interface, which large companies like Facebook and stuff have to do. So that's why the reason that they'll break it up like this. You'll basically have like a network that will then hold within it all the different lines. And there's just a predictable way that you can provide it all that information. Same thing here. You have, you know, predictions. So when are these things going to be here? And this could be as many platforms as you could possibly think of. The cool thing about components is that we can render as many of them as we want. We can put as many of these on the pages we want. And I'm going to be showing you how to do that dynamically. But the advantage of that is that you can just really quickly plop all these on the page and just give it the information it needs to populate these areas. You don't need to be copying and pasting the HTML and make it look exactly the right way and stuff like that. So what's JSX, right? So we've talked about, you know, HTML, that's basically like a markup language, you know? So if you've ever inspected a page in your browser and you just looked at what it looks like, all those little like tags, you know what I mean? It says, you know, probably things like div, you probably see a million divs. Those are all HTML tags, and that's how you mark up the page. So then it can get rendered out to your browser, and that's what you're looking at and interacting with. JSX is essentially a bit of a combination of HTML and JavaScript. When you look at it, it'll look like that. And the reason you do it is that it makes it much easier to understand when you're looking at it. If you ever looked at a huge, like if you inspect your page right now, imagine trying to develop that. Like just whatever page you're on, just like inspect it and look at how crazy the HTML gets and how hard that would be to maintain as a developer if like you were trying to like contribute to this. That could be really hard. And it's often referred to as syntactic sugar. So like it just makes it really easy to see. This is a little example of what a component would look like. This is an extremely simple component. I'll go to the React docs after this and show you maybe a little bit more of a complicated one. But this is essentially it. You just have some HTML, which this is would actually be JSX, which it looks extremely similar. Like HTML will render as valid JSX. There's just additional things that you can do with JSX that you can't do with HTML. But yeah, so this is basically an extremely simple component. And then we have state. This is another thing that's really, really powerful about React. State is everything that's changing about your web page. Everything that is like inputs when you're inputting text, that's changing on your web page, and you can handle that in state. And the cool thing about that is that we can have the state be set and then re-render the whole component, and we can do that really efficiently because of the idea of the virtual DOM I talked about earlier. Essentially, within our component, we'll have this miniature state of all the things that the user is doing, all the things the user is clicking and changing, all the information we're taking in, and we can take that information and we can have, you know, behaviors that we're going to have. Like we're going to set the state, and then that's going to change something. You know, maybe they type something in. We want to set that into the state so that they know that's what they just typed in. And then we can then provide that value somewhere else out of our state. it's kind of hard to explain conceptually without necessarily showing you it in code, but that's kind of the idea, is just the dynamic part that's changing about the page. So props are they're kind of the opposite of state. They're the thing that isn't going to change, right? Props should not be modified. And essentially, when we go back to this example, what would be like a prop here? Well, unless we want the user to be able to change the name of the line, that should be a prop. That should be something that we're giving to line and it can't change and it can just display to the user. So props are like that. They're things that we're just going to pass into the component and we just aren't going to change it. We're just going to take it for what it is. For people that are a little bit more familiar with like computer science, be like a pure function. You know, it's immutable. It's going to return the same thing each time, and they're accessed different ways depending on which kind of component we're in. And then the virtual DOM. So essentially, like I've said before, usually when you have a document object model like that, from my understanding, it's like a tree data structure. So anyone that took CS1 or anything, that's kind of the way that the website is set up. And every time you change something on the website, it cascades down to the lower levels of the tree, right? But with a virtual DOM, the advantage is instead of just letting it cascade down to all those lower levels, you can create in-memory data cache is a big word. You can create a cache that basically tells you what it used to look like. And then when you re-render the component, when something changes about it, you can figure out, well, what just changed? And you can really efficiently re-render the component without having to do a lot of that cascading stuff, you know, going down to the lower levels and all that kind of stuff. And it just makes it a lot more efficient. And now let's see some Firebase. Firebase is owned by Google and it's a cloud platform. I think it's part of their GCP cloud platform. It must be. Instacart, Twitch, Stack. I think that meant to say Slack. I hope it meant to say, yeah. All report using it. Platform of different services and tools that are integrated into a number of different things. So if you understand how to use Firebase, you can plug it into literally anything. You can plug it into a website. You could plug it into Unity. You could Twitch, yes. Yeah, and that doesn't really make sense either, right, Connor? Because Twitch is owned by AWS or is owned by Amazon. So I don't really understand why they would be using it, but I did look that up so someone could fact check me. It's integrated into web apps, iOS, Android, Unity, C++. That's the really good thing. And that's also the good thing about React. If you know how to use React for web apps, you can use it to build mobile applications. You can use it to React VR, I think they have. It's super powerful. So here are some links that you're gonna need. This is the link to the workshop in case anyone doesn't have it yet. If anyone wants to follow along with this, they can clone the repository. And that's gonna have a complete chat app, like little folder, and it's also going to have a skeleton app folder, right? So the skeleton app folder is what we're gonna be changing. And the, what's it called? The complete app is just gonna be so that we can check to make sure everything's installed correctly and we can see what it would look like. And then these are the different docs for Firebase and React. So I'll hop into the React docs really quickly, just because I know that we're going to be stretched for time here. But basically, this is a simple component in code. This is what it looks like for a class component, okay? So just try to follow along. You're gonna see this boilerplate stuff a million times if you're working with, and one second, let me also send the GitHub. I realized I didn't have it up on here and that would have been super helpful. That's my bad. Okay, cool. So there's the link. And if you go back to React, so here, this is a super simple component, class hello message extends React component, right? It has this render method, which basically says, this is what I want to render onto the page. And then it returns just HTML. And as you can see, it's actually accessing props, right? So it's accessing this.props.name. So something else, somewhere else is passing into this a name and we're receiving it as props. And you can see here what that other thing is. Basically, this is that syntactic sugar, right? This is the JSX. You have hello message and then you have name equals Taylor. So this is how you pass props in React. You literally just make a tag with the name of the component and then you add whatever the prop name equals and then whatever you want it to equal, right? So if we wanted to change this to be rendering out something else, I could say Dylan, and this is, you don't really need to worry about this either, this React DOM.render. We're gonna do that one time. in our entire application. And when we look at the code, it's going to make more sense, but this is not really going to be something that you're doing 100 times, you know? So that is how we're going to do that. And then we're going to come back here and I'm going to show you how you could change this class component into a function, just kind of what the difference is. And I think Jose beat me to it. Yeah, so basically, yeah, Jose just mentioned hooks. I'm not going to cover hooks, but hooks are a way that you can add a class, that you can add state to a function component. That probably makes no sense right now, but so that's why I wasn't going to really go deep into that, but just kind of understand that for our purposes right now, our function components will not have a state and our class components will. So that's kind of what's going to differentiate those two and make us decide what we're going to use for what, okay? So this is us changing this into a function component. And honestly, I'm actually going to write this a way that it's probably going to be easier for you to understand. Function hello message. And then we're just going to return this, and it's still breaking. So that's because we need this. And then it's not showing anything, right? And that's because there's no such thing as this in a function. For people that aren't familiar with object-oriented programming, this is referring to like the scope of the class that we just had, but now we don't have that. So when we want to access props in a function component, this is how we take them in, right? The other way, we just access them via this.props. This way, we pass them in like this. And we can just use them like that. So that's how we would enter in all the different props that we're receiving and whatnot and render them onto the page. So that's that. And now we're going to look at a little bit of state. And once we look at this, then we're going to hop over to Firebase and start actually working with our application. So this is how you do state. Like you're going to have a class, right? It's going to be called timer, and it's going to extend React.component. This is just something you need to like accept. I have no idea what it does, and I've used React for a very long time, like under the hood, and you don't need to understand it to necessarily start getting to work with it. I probably have some idea, but like you don't really need to understand it that well in order to be able to work with React and use it for the things that you're going to be using it for. So you're going to write constructor props, super props, which essentially, if you like object-oriented programming, right? Like you have this constructor, and super would mean like grab it from whatever's rendering me. So this will probably have a parent component that's rendering it, and that's what it's grabbing its props from. That's what it's going to pass them down to. But that's unnecessary for us to know for like our purposes, right? And then we're going to say this.state equals, and this is a JavaScript object, right? So we're going to have open curly brackets, close curly brackets. And even to make this a little bit easier, we could just do this like this. And that's our state, right? So that's how the state works. We don't really need to worry about tick. This is kind of strange. Like you wouldn't be setting interval too much. This is just basically saying every 1,000 milliseconds, call this function again. But we're doing it in component did mount, right? So component did mount is one of those lifecycle methods I was talking about. Essentially what this means is when my component comes up on the page, do this. So when my component shows up on the page, set an interval, and every 1,000 seconds, add 1 to my state. So then we come back into tick, and it's actually kind of helpful to look at this set state. So Connor, the difference between mount and render is essentially when the component renders, every time the state changes, it's going to render again, right? And for a function component, it's going to render when the parent component changes, right? So the parent component in this case being the component that has like the tag for the class. But that's kind of getting a little bit confusing. Let's just focus for this case on like when it renders just like this. So basically every time that seconds is getting 1 added to it, it's rendering the whole component again. But it's only mounting once. It's only mounting the first time that we see it come up, right? So it's mounting at second 0. And then every time the component renders, it's going to do it again and again and again and again. And then when it unmounts, so that means when we can no longer see it and it's gone from the page, then it's going to clear the interval. So it's just going to say, just get rid of everything. You won't really see this as much. You'll see a ton of this. People use component did mount a lot because a lot of the time it's important to initialize the different things about the component. So this is that same React DOM.render, but that's kind of like a brief kind of overview. And now we can kind of go and start looking at what the structure of the code and everything looks like. So for how many people actually have the code installed and are going to try to follow along? You can just message in the chat, but I just want to make sure. So as long as you guys have it, if you want to follow along, first we're just going to make sure that everything's set up correctly. So what you're going to do is I've opened this in VS Code because this is just my preferred code editor. If you have a code editor downloaded that you prefer, by all means, go ahead. You just have to open up the folder. And basically, this is the structure of our application. So this is called complete chat, right? And this is very boilerplate structure, except for the Firebase stuff that you'll see for every React application. You'll have a source folder. And what I've set up here are different folders for all of the components that we'll have, all the helper functions that we're going to need, all the different pages of the application, and then the different services that we're going to be using. And for now, we're just going to concern ourselves with service. So this is what we have open here, right? And this is my API key. You know, I shouldn't be showing it. I'm going to get rid of all the things that this is corresponding to later. So if anyone's watching this video like later recording and is going to try to like access the app, do something that they weren't supposed to do, well, like, you know, you really need to keep this a secret, and you need to be careful not to put this onto GitHub or put this onto other places, because in the case of Firebase, we actually don't have a credit card hooked up to it or anything. But if we were using something else that had a credit card hooked up to it, people could take your API key and start running up, you know, credits and start doing things with that platform. So it's really important, just, you know, especially if you're new to this kind of stuff, just to make sure to always keep these a secret. But for the purposes of this, I'm just going to let you guys see them. And then what we're going to do is I'm going to take you guys through the course of creating a project in Firebase and showing you how you'll connect it to your web app. Okay. So we'll just get rid of these. And then we'll hop back over. And this is kind of boilerplate stuff. I know I really didn't explain what this is doing exactly, but just kind of understand this import statement here is grabbing Firebase. So this is something that we have installed into our application. And we can see all the things that we have installed into our application here in this package JSON. And we can see Firebase here, right? So this is everything that you have installed here. And we want to use Firebase, so we're going to import it into this folder. And this is just the way that you initialize an app, right? This is just from Firebase, how they do it. And this export const is basically just exposing this to the rest of our application. So it's saying that we can use auth in other files and other places in our app. So let's just hop back over to here. And for everyone that has gotten this set up so far, this is the Firebase documentation. Just some of the different things that you can use with it. But we're going to go to the console for now. And this is what you'll see. This is the Firebase console. This is how you'll create your different projects and whatnot. And we will add a new project. So you can name your project whatever you want. For me, I'm just going to name this skeleton project, because this is going to be the one that corresponds to all the stuff that we do for like that skeleton app that you saw. So we're going to click here. Do we want to enable Google? We could. Let's go ahead. Just click the default account and then create the project, and then we'll wait for the project to get created. Yeah, so Connor, like Chris is saying, like the reason you can plug it into anything is because it's really just like a platform that you can host like information and authentication and things like that. Like these services that you wouldn't just need in a web application, like you can use across different things. And they have really, really good documentation for all that different kind of stuff. So now we're here and we can see, you know, this is named the skeleton project, and we can get started by adding Firebase to our app. So that's exactly what we want to do. So we have iOS, Android, or web. We're going to click web. We're going to give it a nickname. So we'll just call it the same thing. And we also want to set up hosting. So this will automatically create something that we can deploy our app to at the end of the workshop. We're going to register the application. And then we don't need to do this because of the fact that we're using React and we already took all the Firebase stuff in. We don't even need to worry about what this would even do. We essentially just need to know that we already have all our stuff installed. This is something you will need to install Firebase tools, but I think you'll only need it if you want to deploy your app. I don't think I'm doing anything with Firebase. I am actually, yeah. You will need to, am I? I'm going to say install it anyway. I don't think I'm using it for anything but hosting, but I could be wrong and have just completely forgotten about what we might need it for. And then this is what you'll do to deploy to Firebase. And I can go through this when we actually go and do the deployment. But for now, we're just setting up our app, okay? So then we're going to continue to the console, right? And this is our project. And essentially, these are all the services that we can now use within this project. So we're going to go ahead and go to Authentication. And this is the only thing that we need to set ourselves, because we need to tell them how do we want to let users sign in. So if we set up our sign-in method, we'll see all the different ways that we can let people do this. We can let them sign up with an even one password, with a phone, with a Google account, play games, all these different things. For the purposes of this, we're going to use email and password. So I'm going to click here and I'm going to enable it. And you can even do passwordless sign-in, but I think that might be a little bit of a pain. So let's just do this. Okay, so now that we have it enabled, how do we use it?
So you're going a little bit fast. Could you go over this part, please?
Yeah, totally. Sorry about that. And totally, like, anyone else can turn on their mic and just like let me know, like, I have no idea what's going on, and I can definitely totally slow down. So let me go back. Where did I lose anybody? What do you guys want me to go back to?
One of the questions was, where should you be running npm install? Like
so I haven't gotten to that part yet because I've already set up the packages for you. So essentially, you aren't going to need to install these packages yourself that way. You're just going to need to run one command once, and that's going to install all the packages that are already set up in that file that I showed you. Okay, so if people are lost in the code, where we're at exactly here is if you go to the complete chat folder, and then you go to source, and this is if you already have the code open, right? Go to complete chat, go to source, and then click on services. Oh, okay, yeah. So back here, what did anybody have a problem?
Can you go over how to set up a new app again?
How to set up a new app in Firebase? Yeah, definitely. So the way you set up a new project is you go to console.firebase.google.com right here. And you go here and you click add project. We actually aren't, so we're hooking our complete chat up to our skeleton one, but that's because it doesn't matter what we call it, what we name it. All we need are those API keys that I was showing here, right? All we need are these. All we need is an API key, an auth domain, and a database URL. So what these three things will do will let us use the services in Firebase in our application. So those are like the purpose of those three things. And if anyone wants to know how to clone the repository, you do click git clone, and then take the URL of this, copy it, or you can even go here, copy this, come back to this, and then you'll paste it here. And if you run that, whatever directory you're in, wherever you are in your command prompt, it'll clone it into there.
Another question is, okay, but do I check also set up Firebase hosting when I deploy as web app?
Yes, you can definitely do that. You can set up Firebase hosting, and that's only if you want to deploy your application. If you don't, it's totally fine. And I'm going to go through how to deploy it at the end if we have time. I can even do it, for people that just want to stick around in case we get caught with some other things. But yeah, that you definitely can do that.
And another question is, they'd like more explanation about what the Firebase.js file is. Like, is it a template?
Okay. Yeah, so this Firebase.js file here, essentially, it is like boilerplate stuff. And what I mean by boilerplate is just like stuff that Firebase is just giving us and just saying like, this is what I need to connect to your application. So this config here, right? This is JavaScript, and this is creating something called a JavaScript object. So each one of these would be a key and then the corresponding value. And then Firebase has a method called initialize app. And if you're using VS Code, you can even see what the method does. But essentially, this is telling Firebase, I want to initialize an app here, and here's how I'm going to connect to Firebase. Here's all the information that I need to authenticate to Firebase, to do things with Firebase, to authenticate my users, to do putting things into my database, to doing all those kind of things.
One question is, should they be in the complete chat folder or skeleton chat folder?
For now, we're going to stay in complete chat. And the reason for that is we're just making sure this works, okay, for you locally. Because Otherwise, when we get into the skeleton chat folder, it's going to be a pain because people are going to have problems where they can't start the application even. And this is just making sure, because this is exactly what we're trying to make skeleton app become, you know? So we start in this complete chat folder and we're just adding in these API keys and not worrying about anything else in this, just to make sure that we can connect to Firebase and use its services. And I'll give a second in case anyone else is having a problem with this part. You only have to do this once, and then you'll be able to connect to your application and you can just worry about, you know, interacting with Firebase and doing all that different kind of stuff. You do not, Connor, no. You don't have to do Firebase init. Firebase init will just be if you want to host your application. So when you do Firebase init, it will say what services do you want to deploy. But right now we're running it what I would call locally, which just means running it on your computer. And you don't need to worry too much about doing the Firebase init and all that, because this will let us connect. So Connor, were you able to get to the point where you have a, you know, a folder and you have a project up? Okay, cool. So if anyone else has anything, feel free to message, and I'm sure that Chris will stop me, or you guys can also stop me. Just go ahead. I'm about to do that. So Anthony, basically the way where you get your keys from is you go to, where do you get the keys? Settings, project settings. And here they are in config. So this is the exact configuration of our project, right? It has the API key, the auth domain, and the database URL, which are all the three things we need to connect our application to Firebase and start using it, right? So what you should be able to do now is grab this API key, go back to your code and paste it in. Grab this auth domain, paste that in too, and then go back to your database URL. And put that in as well. So now that you have these three things here, I'm going to show you how to run the application locally. Okay, so the settings, Nicholas, are right here. If you go to project overview, and then this little gear icon, click on it, and then click on project settings. No problem. Connor, that probably would have been a smart move by me too. So now what we're going to go ahead and do is we're going to take this and we're going to go to our command prompt. For anyone unfamiliar, this is called terminal. And can you guys see this? As long as everyone can see. Okay, good. So I'm in the directory that I need to be in. If you want to get to this directory, all you do is you can right click on the folder that you have all this saved in. So I'll even just go ahead and show you guys. So, oh, of course, that's how that works. 1 second. We'll go here, take the folder that it's in. So mine is in Dylan and it's not letting me open it. So I'll just open this up. And you're gonna right click on it. And I think it should let you just copy path. If it doesn't, then just put the folder onto your desktop and then we'll be able to navigate to it from there. So I think that's probably the easiest way. Take whatever folder that you have this located in and then just throw it onto your desktop. And I'll try to open the chat up again in case anyone's having an issue with that. In VS Code, you can do Control+ and open an integrated terminal. Yeah, that is true. I prefer to use this just because it kind of is easier for me to interact with it that way. But that is true. You can also, in VS Code, if you go up here and you click terminal, you can open up a terminal in VS Code. Oh, and it's already in the right directory. That's true. Yeah, so that is a much easier way. If you want to just interact with it that way, you can click new terminal and it'll start out the right directory for you. Yeah, so I mean, I guess we can just, yeah, I'll go ahead and do that because that'll probably be easier for everyone. Just understand that this is the same directory as this that I'm working out of here. You don't see the off domain and data stuff? So the off domain and data stuff, so you're here and you just don't see this config. Okay, yep. Yeah, there you go. You got to click on config, and then you'll be able to see all the information that you got to copy and paste in. Okay, cool. And everybody else, feel free to message if you have any problems. You paste it into this file, so it's in complete chat, source, services, firebase.js. And you're going to put it into the config section. And now, in order to be able to interact with our app, we'll go here and we will npm install. So actually, first do a cd, which means change directory, which is just like changing which folder you're in on this terminal. And you're going to cd into complete chat. Yep, this recording will be posted. So if you feel like you won't be able to catch up, it's totally fine. We will be posting this. So yeah, you'll be changing your directory into complete chat. And then from complete chat, we're going to type in npm install. It doesn't let you cd from your command line. That is strange. I've actually, it should let you, because that's a pretty regular command. If you just type in cd, and then you also have to type in what directory you want to go to. So cd complete-chat from kh-react-firebase-workshop. Yeah, in VS Code, if you want to go directly to it, you can just go up here to terminal, click new terminal, and it'll open one directly in where you're at, okay? And it seems like people are a little bit more familiar with that. So I'll just go ahead and do the same thing here. So you're going to come to this terminal that you just opened, right? And you can go cd complete-chat. And then you're going to run the command. It's all good. Then you're going to run the command npm install. And what this is going to do for us is it's going to grab all of the different packages that are in our package.json, and it's going to create this thing called a package-lock.json. And essentially, this is just all the information on these different packages that the application needs to know what it's going to do. And when you go to package.lock.json, you can see all the different information. This is extremely long, obviously, but essentially, packages are just other bits of code that we're going to use to do these different things. So React within itself would be a package. So now we're going to go, and now that we have it installed, we're going to go and we're going to type in npm start. So now it's going to say starting the development server. And eventually it's going to start the development server. We could hope. Let me just see if I already have something else running. I don't know why this is so long. Nope. Oh, so it opened a React app for you? Yeah, well, it looks like my computer does not like me today. All right. Yeah, it's giving me an issue, and I'm not sure why. Wait, can you guys see the login screen? Everyone that was able to get it working. Okay, awesome. So looks like this is a me problem. That is so strange. Yeah, I use the control C because it isn't seem to be launching the development server, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. Yeah, that is true. Let me try that. So this node modules folder is essentially all the different packages, like just a ton of different packages that node needs to do its different things and load these different packages and stuff. So I'm going to delete this and I'm going to try to install again because I seem to be having an issue. So that tab that's already open is actually the deployed version of the site. And you guys can definitely check this out as well. This is the deployed version of the site that's already up. And that's essentially what it should look like when you're running it locally. So if you go to don't have an account and sign up and just enter any email and any password, it should log you into the chat. And you should be able to see what the chat looks like and stuff like that. But this is essentially what chat looks like. Oh, this is so tragic. I don't know if my little computer just can't handle this or what. Let me try closing other applications. Okay, and then now let's try npm start. And I'll give it a second. Let's see. Oh, that's stupid. The problem was, so I'm using a terminal inside of Visual Studio Code, and this is opening something in Google Chrome, and it didn't like that. It thought that it was trying to do something like malicious. This is so weird. I've never had this problem before. And there you go. Well, after no further ado, here's our login application. And as long as you guys were able to get this running locally, you should be good for us to start moving on to the next section. Yep, and that will be an error you get. So that was why the given sign-in provider error, you need to come back here, click on authentication, and you need to click on sign-in method and enable email password. If you don't enable this, it won't let you use emails and passwords to, authenticate people, and that's the issue that you're having right now. Okay. Yes, you were not change them, but you have to click on them in order to get the information for this file in complete chat. When you tried to send something, yeah, that might be an error. As long as you're able to get it up and running, that should be fine because you probably just don't have right access to it. But that's fine. As long as you're able to get it up and running, we can move on to the next step, okay? So were anyone that wanted to follow along, were they able to get the application running? And if not, what were your errors? Okay, awesome. What do you do on the login screen? If you want to register, you can go to the register screen by clicking the link on the bottom. But for this case, I think it seems like most of the people that are following along have been able to catch up so far. So now we can go and start actually doing some React stuff, okay? And for the moment being, I'm going to abstract away everything else that this application is doing, just because of the fact that it's not necessary for our information to know, just because right now we want to focus on the React, right? We don't want to focus on all the other stuff. I can show you how the actual app is being rendered though, I guess. If we go into index.js, this is essentially what you saw before, right? So this is what you'll see an index.js file in every React application. And I'm now in skeleton chat because we're going to start working at it here to start adding things. So in every React application, you'll see this. It has React DOM.render. It's rendering the app. And it has these different things like, strict mode, which doesn't really matter that much, but this is what you'll see in most apps. It is pretty much just taking this app component that it's taking in from this file, and then it's appending it to this HTML thing right here. And this is where our entire app will be, right inside of this div tag. So we come back out here, and actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I think also due to the nature of how much time we have in this workshop, I'm a little worried about having everyone install this app too. I guess we can try it. Okay, so to get started with the skeleton chat one, you're gonna basically come to here, come to your firebase.js file, copy it, close complete chat, come into skeleton chat, go to services firebase.js, and paste that in. Okay. And then you'll come back up here to our terminal again, cd ... to leave the directory that you're currently in, which is going to be complete chat. And then you're going to cd into skeleton chat. And from skeleton chat, we're going to do the exact same thing that we did before. So we're going to npm install. To leave npm start, press the control key and C. That will stop whatever active process is happening in your terminal. And that's actually really important to know when you start working with this kind of stuff, because there's going to be cases where like you just got to kill the application because you did something wrong and it keeps doing something weird. So here's our package.json here. I just installed it, so I have all the packages ready. And now I'm going to npm start this. And I think it's going to give me an error. We're going to see. Something is already running on port 3000. You're absolutely right. You got to control C here. So control C on wherever you're running the other one. So yeah, cd ... is to go back out of folder. So to get into here, you need to do cd ... and then you need to do cd into skeleton chat. Yep, that's exactly what you should be getting, Nicholas. So now we're going to try to run it, and I'm going to get the same error that Nicholas is getting, I'd imagine. And it's waiting, we're waiting. I've literally never had problems with this before. It has to be because I'm running Zoom. And boom, yeah. So it's saying we have a parsing error, right? So what does that mean? Now we're actually going to write some React, okay? I kind of just want to abstract away these different parts of the application right now, just because they're unnecessary to explain. And I'm going to go over and explain them later, but that's just going to kind of not necessarily be as helpful as me kind of showing you what some of these different parts of the app do and us actually implementing some of them ourselves, right? So if we go to index or go to pages and login, and I'm gonna zoom out here a little bit because this is actually a little bit too much. And I'm also gonna close this side thing. So as you see, I've created a login component here. And this login component is a class component like we saw before. It has a constructor that passes in props, and then it does super props. And then it creates a state within the application, okay? And this state is just gonna be what the state of the error is. So if we have an error in our login, what the email is and what the password is. And then these two functions are, I don't know if you've ever seen binds or anything like that before, anyone that's ever used JavaScript. This is a JavaScript thing, not a React thing. It's saying this function is bound to this scope, to within this class. So if anyone's familiar with Java or anything like that, it's basically saying this function is calling from this class, and it lets us just solve some problems that we might have with it. I'm not gonna actually implement these two functions right now. We're gonna implement those in a different file, but I'm just gonna tell you what they do. This handle change function is gonna take in an event, and that event is going to be us changing an input, right? So us typing something into an input field is gonna be the event that this is handling the change for. So every time that we type something into an input field, it's gonna emit an event. And then this is going to set that into our state like we saw before, and it's going to re-render the component with this new value. And this is a little bit strange, but it's a good way to write React. And essentially what it does is when it sets the state, don't really worry about this exactly, but it's saying in the state, find the name of my input field and set its value to be what we want its value to be. Okay. That's a linting thing. It might be because of the fact that like you no longer need to use it. What you'll find is that you're asking why is super crossed out. React changes very much, and it is always iterating on itself. So a lot of the time, like when I started using it, it was a much different thing than it is now. But yeah, so now we have this handle change here, and then this handle submit. So what does this handle submit do? As we see, it's an async function. People that don't know what that means, essentially, JavaScript runs everything as fast as it can. So everything that's inside of a function, if you're familiar with C or any other language, it runs things sequentially. JavaScript is going to run it whenever it can, like it's just going to get it in. And essentially async is saying, we want to run this, but like this depends on something else, right? So how could we know what our error is before we even sign in the user, right? Like what if it runs this before this? That's going to give us a huge problem. So the way that we solve that here is essentially handling submit means we're gonna take in what you're submitting, right? So this is gonna be like a login form. Callbacks, promises, or async await. I don't have a choice, Connor. I'll use anything. It's whatever gets the job done. That's more like a specific JavaScript thing, but I'm just using async await here because it's kind of like syntactically, like you could kind of understand what it's doing, right? Like it's awaiting sign in, and then if it catches an error, so if this doesn't work, then it's gonna set that error into our state. Right? And where this sign-in method is coming from is essentially we're grabbing it from our helper methods. And I'm going to kind of abstract that away too, just so that we can focus on the React right now. But this is essentially the method that's going to let us sign in users in Firebase, right? So we're importing that from another place in the project, and then we're giving it the email and the password that we have stored in state. And what we have to do is now write some JSX, write some code that's going to let us do this. And I'm going to kind of live code this just to show you what the process is for doing this usually. But if you don't feel like doing that and you kind of just want to watch and you don't want to do all that, you can copy and paste exactly what is in complete chat, pages, login. Literally, you can copy and paste this code exactly, and it should work for you. So just copy and paste all of this and just drop it in, and the login page will be functional, okay? In this case, I'm not worrying too much about that. For the case of the workshop, I was trying to keep it simple and just make it as syntactically like people could understand. And responding to Owen. And what happens after the sign-in? I don't see any code that can confirm the user. Does the sign-in function do that somehow? The sign-in function does do that. So let me reiterate again. I am abstracting away all the other stuff in the application. For right now, because of the fact that people are really introductory and I just don't want to, you know, freak anybody out showing them like all this other stuff that they don't understand, I'm just trying to focus on this login component so that we can kind of get an idea of like how we could make our own components, right? So coming back into login, the first thing that we'll need is an HTML tag called a form. And what this form is, right? A form is basically something where we're going to collect the different information on the different fields in the form, right? So the different inputs. And then we're going to submit the form and all of the inputs to something that's going to handle it, something that's going to know what to do with it, right? You're not getting any HTML syntax in your JSX. You might have to get like syntax and stuff like that. It might just depend on what you're using for a code editor and stuff, or also a number of different things. I'm not sure exactly why, but yeah. So what we're going to do here, right, is we can have different methods that are going to handle the different things that are happening within this component. Okay, so basically when this form is submitted, we want to call this handle submit function here that'll log in our user. Okay, so for now, we're just going to say form. And the way that you do this in JavaScript, right, the way that you handle these events is just like this. You'll say on submit this dot handle submit. And this won't compile. And that's because in signup, it's also broken. So I'm going to go and fix signup. Because signup is exactly the same component, because it literally, this is going to be exactly the same. The only thing that we're going to change about signup is that it's going to have sign up instead of sign in. And that's going to be it. And we're just going to copy and paste the same code between the two, okay? I think that is because I'm running, well, that should be happening for you too, actually. I don't know if that's a setting within React that you set or something, but every time you save the file, it should be re-rendering the application. So if that isn't happening for you, that's a bit strange. You shouldn't have to do npm start every time you make a change. But to kind of go into the React stuff, now that we actually have the application running, right? Because we put this form in here and we also put it in sign up just so that there wasn't anything not here, right? If we go back to our application, it should be running and we should just see this really ugly input, right? And for the purpose of this, I don't think it has to look great. First, we're actually going to make it really, really ugly, just so that we can narrow down on what is this thing doing. So, and you can just go ahead. This is like obviously not an HTML workshop, but I think you can kind of tell what each of these things is because it is a markdown language. So like the label is going to be a label, the input is going to be an input, the form is going to be a form. You know, I'm not pulling any tricks, right? So we have our label and we're going to call it email. And then we have an input. And this is where we're actually going to handle the input, right? So we're going to handle what people put into the input, and we're going to use this handle change to put it into state. Oh yeah, if you see a big thing, that's because you need to log out. So we have our input here. And the way that you do that, right, is you go on change equals this dot handle change. And this is going to handle every time that we change it, and it's going to set it into the state. So here we're grabbing the email, the password, and the error out of this dot state, right? So out of this, we're grabbing this information. And every time that we type something in here, it's going to call handle change, and we need to give it a name so it knows what to set in state. So we'll name it email. And then every time we come back down here, we're going to console.log email. And what this console.log does, it's the same as a print statement, right? A print statement in like any other language, it's going to print something out to the console. So if we go back to our application, we'll see email, which is, this is hideous, but it's getting the job done, right? And as you can see, it's logging nothing because currently there's nothing in email. But if I type in D, boom, it's going to log out D. E, D, you know, so it's keeping track of that in state. Why is it logging it twice? That is a great question. On change, it's handling change. And then in change, it's setting state. You know, well, it's happening. We'll accept it for the purpose of the workshop and we'll move forward. Because I don't actually know why it's doing that console.log twice. It's re-rendering, it must be re-rendering the component twice somewhere, and I'm not exactly sure where that is. But it isn't a big deal. As long as it's sending email correctly for us in the state, for our purposes, we're fine with that. So what we're going to do now is we're going to do the exact same thing for password. So copy this, paste it right underneath, call it password, change the name to be password, and now if we console.log password, it will give us the same thing. So now what do we want to do? Well, we want to be able to try to sign in with this information, and we want to see what the error is if we can't sign in. When you do your console.log query, since you can't see, if you put console.log inside the render function, you should be able to see it, Corey. I'm not sure why that wouldn't be showing up for you. So just to move forward here, then we're going to go ahead and it should show up in the, if you go to the page, right click and click inspect, it should show up in the console. Okay. Outside of login.js, you had to go to signup.js and just put anything here. You can just, this is what I copy and pasted here, but it has to have something here because otherwise it's trying to enter something empty. Even if like you don't already have this written, you could just put like this, anything, like literally anything that you put here just so that it isn't throwing an error for us, because we're just going to copy and paste the same stuff over. And then we're going to come back here and we're going to have a button. The type is going to be submit. And essentially what this button submit means, it just says, when I click this button, try to submit the form, you know, do this on submit, right? And we'll say, call it login. And as you can see, we have an email, password, login, and we also want to see what is the error for getting one. So for this case, what you can actually do is in React, you can grab the field out of state, right? And you can go ahead and just show, what is it? You know, just log it out if it's having a problem. And I also didn't do this before, but we should be setting the value of each of these equal to what they are. How do we disable the div if the error is null? So how do you just not even use this div? So I will show you guys how to do that. This is a little bit more complicated, which is why I didn't necessarily want to, but I can definitely show it. Basically, you will do two curly brackets like this, right? Error, 2 ats, and then this will make it so error has to exist, basically, in order to show the div. Otherwise, it won't even show. And what we end up with here now is the most simple form you've ever seen in your life. And if I just type in something random at d.com and something random like this, we click login, there's no user record corresponding to this identifier, right? So it's working. Is everyone else here, right? Like if you want to be here, have you been able to get here? Awesome, awesome, that's great. The component knows how to use handle submit, right? Because of the fact that this is a form, and forms have like logic associated with them. And this is an HTML thing, not a React thing, right? this form, when you click a button that has the type submit in it, will just submit the form. That is like across HTML, that's how forms work. But inside of React, when you have this on submit here, basically it will tell what the form will do. And we don't really need to worry about exactly what this event.prevent default is. Just know it's making it so when you submit the form, it essentially doesn't re-render the page. Because usually when you submit a form, you're going to refresh your page. We don't want to do that. So that's pretty much what that does. So everybody's this far, right? Anyone that wants to be? And everyone that's better than us has already copy and pasted the login page and has a nice, beautiful one, but that's okay. So then we're going to copy this, go into sign up, and we're going to paste this. And now when we go here, come up here and replace login with register. And it kicks us right back into login. That's so strange. Yeah, so it's not letting us render it. So instead, I'm just going to go straight to here. Type in link. This is that syntactic sugar that I was talking about. We're essentially using, this is a React component, not an HTML component. And that's why you're getting that kind of highlighting there. So I've already imported this in here for you. You won't have to do any of the importing yourself. And I'm importing it from a different package that's helping us with routing. It is /signup. You're right, Matt. Damn, that's so tragic. Well, we're already here. We might as well link to equals, and we're going to give it where do we want to go. And like Matt said, we're going to do /signup. And it's so good that he said that, because if this didn't work, I was going to be so confused. Okay, so nice. So then we want to say, what is the text for the link? And we'll just say, already registered? Sign up now. And then we'll come back here. I'm in the wrong component, aren't I? You want to put this in your login component. That's my mistake. Already registered, sign up now. We'll click on this. It'll take us to sign up. And this might be confusing, but the pages are exactly the same right now. So that's why we can't really tell the difference. So we're going to go to sign up and maybe differentiate it a little bit, right? So go on to sign up, go link to equals /login. And we're going to have that link say, hey, already registered login. And you're right. I think what I wrote on the login page doesn't make any sense. Yeah, not registered yet. Sign up now. And we'll come back to our app. Okay, already registered, login. Not registered yet, sign up now. Is everybody here? Is anyone else having an issue? Please feel free to message in the chat. Even turn your mic on and stop me if you want, because sometimes I'm not keeping up with the chat, I know. But if everyone is here, now we can actually log in, right? So we can go here. Okay, so you can't type in your text boxes, it's not doing that. That's likely because you didn't add a name. The name has to be email and the name has to be password in order for it to be mapping correctly in your state. And I do recognize that this is hideously ugly, but do understand like that the making this look prettier is going to be the easier part of your understanding here. The harder part is going to be all this business logic of like, how do I use React and stuff? Within several weeks or just even a couple weeks, if you just look at some HTML and some CSS, and try to hammer out those details, you're going to get a lot better with it really quickly. Like I definitely guarantee you that. So if you're feeling a little discouraged that you can't do it straight away, don't even worry about it. But for now, we're going to let it look terrible because why not? It is doing its job. So now we want to register. So make sure that this says sign up and then type in whatever email you want. I'm going to do d@d.com. Why not? And then the password, I'll do this. Actually, I want to remember it. We'll say password. And this still says login. Let me just fix that. And that's because we just copy and pasted the code over. But in the sign up, you can make this say register, just so that it's a little bit easier to differentiate between the pages. And then we're going to register, and boom, it works magically. You know, we were able to get it to work. So basically, you guys just built, you know, the functionality to sign in and sign up users. Yeah, it's a lot fancier now, right, Jacob? This is a whole different ballgame. So if we go back, right, and we actually want to look now at like, where is this user that we just created? If you go back to your console here and you click on authentication and you click on users, now we see d@d.com and we see their user ID, right? When they signed in, when they were created. So now we have a user in our authenticated and they can log into our application. If anyone else having any problems with that, I can definitely take a second and try to help you out. And now I kind of want to go back here and I want to discuss more of like, how did we do that? So we were using these methods, this sign up method here, and this login method, or the sign in method here. And where those are coming from is helpers. So go to helpers, go to auth.js. These are all of the methods that we're using. And essentially, like we were doing before, so that we could use auth here, right? Like the same way that we had this export here, export auth, export db. We haven't used db yet, but we have used auth. And by, how do you understand how to use all of that? You don't. I'm gonna be honest with you. You absolutely, like, this is what we like would call boilerplate stuff, right? This is stuff that you set up once, and it's basically like, there is no intuition here, right? Like you couldn't just go on a board and write down how to do this. And that's kind of the nature of it with a lot of this web app kind of stuff. You just have to Google it, you have to search it until you can figure out how to do what you're trying to do. Like Stack Overflow is gonna be your best friend. Any question that you have, you can just look up online and it'll be able to give you the solution, like how you could do that. Connor, actually Firebase makes it, so I'm gonna explain more of that later. That's kind of a higher level topic, but I'm gonna explain how it's handling whether we're logged in or not later. That's just gonna be something that I go over at the end. And just curious, if you play with this later on, have any questions, would there be a good time to bring this up in the future, or would it just be if we can flag you guys down and have free time? You can message me anytime. I'm gonna give you guys my information at the end, just so that it's the easiest for you guys to get in contact with me with any further questions. Because I think that all we're gonna have time to do here is finish up this second part to get our chats in, and then that's going to be it. I had a couple other things planned, but I can run through the infrastructure of the app, but in 30 minutes, I don't think we're going to have enough time to get all of that out. But yeah, so now, as you can see, this auth here, we're exporting it, and we go to auth here, and these are straight out of the docs for Firebase. So if you go to the Firebase Docs, it has all of the different information on what you can do, right? So get started, what exactly, how can you configure these things and get all of them set up? And the URL for that is docs/database/web/start. But you could also just go to firebase.google.com, start reading through the documentation. This is how everything works, right? How all of the Firebase stuff works. And then we go to read and write data. And this is how we reference our database. So their database equals firebase.database. This is exactly what we're doing. And I'll go to auth first, actually, just to make that a little bit clearer. In authentication, go to web, and then you can go to manage users. Get started is probably the best place. And you can see, this is where you're finding these methods, right? Firebase.auth.create user with email and password. Firebase.auth.sign in with email and password. The on-off state change that I'm going to talk about later. These are all the ways that we're working with that authentication that we set up, and Firebase is going to have a huge amount of information about these. It's just we're kind of limited with time. So I'm going to go back here, and this is just basically where those are coming from. So now we're going to make it so that our chat can actually work. Because what you'll notice, right, is right now, if you go into the chat, which I think is here. Yeah, this is the right one. And then if I type in anything and I click send, it broke. You know, it didn't like that at all. So the reason it didn't like that, and the reason that it just gave us that error, you actually can all chat on the one that I already have up. Like that one is already working. It should work at least. So you should just be able to like write things to that one. If you like want to use the chat application. I think I sent it way earlier, but just for the purpose of right now, I just want to make sure that we can get through these last couple of things. So this is the chat page. Don't really worry about how all these different things work. When you see me importing all these things like app bar, typography, button, toolbar, and then you see this is obviously a lot to look at, but essentially just understand style is different CSS styles. So that's how I'm making these things look the way that they look. And these things aren't coming out of nowhere, like they're not magic. If you go to material, UI, and you click here, this is where all of it is. And I highly recommend this. Go to components, you can use any of these, literally any of them. And they've created all of these so that you can just copy and paste this code into your project after you initially set it up, you know, in the getting started section. But this is extremely helpful. You can use all of their different components. You don't have to write any of them. It's super just easy to just drop in. Kind of a styles framework. They call it I think it's a component library. And the reason is that a styles framework would be more like a Bootstrap, right? So Bootstrap is more like we're actually making CSS styles that we're going to add. And this is more like heavier duty. Like we're just going to have a component that we can just use. So now we're going to go into chat, and this chat panel, we don't really need to worry about all this kind of stuff. This is just setting up the page and how it looks. We're going to go into chat panel, which is in components, chat panel. And now we're going to look at how are we actually going to make these messages show up for the user, right? And the two things that I'm going to focus on implementing here are component did mount and handle submit, because the rest of this, like if we had enough time, I could delete all this and just make a really simple thing that's just rendering divs the same way we did with the login, right? And that would be a lot easier to understand. This just obviously looks better. So we don't even really necessarily need to worry about the implementation here too much. I don't even really think that we're going to have time to worry about the implementation here too much. What we're really going to want to worry about right now, right, is a couple of things. Basically, we want to worry about this chats here. So if we go back up to our state, looks very similar to the current one. And this is another method that you can use from auth. Ooh, Connor's out, but he learned a lot. That's great. See you later, Connor. So this is another thing that you can use from auth. Basically, you use auth.currentUser. And I already imported all the things for you, so I don't even need to worry about that. Auth.currentUser. And this will just give you the user's information that's currently logged in. Chats. So this chats is going to be an array of all the different chats that we have. For people like unfamiliar, intro to C, whatnot, this is just going to be like a list of different chats. Content, which is going to be just an empty string, a read error and a write error. So a read error means we're trying to get the chats and we have a problem. We can't get the chats for whatever reason. A write error means we're trying to put a new chat up there and it just doesn't let us do it. And those are the two things we're going to be wanting to do. So just from like everyone's understanding of like lifecycle methods, like the first time we come on the chat page, what do we want to be doing in component did mount? Like, what would you expect? And pretend that wasn't there. And anyone in the chat could message or just like what you would expect it to do. Because that's what we're going to be implementing right now, is essentially grabbing the information out of the database and then using that to display to the user. So for this, essentially what we're going to do is we're going to use our database, so this DB, and if we hop back over to the Firebase documentation, it'll make it a lot clearer what exactly I'm doing. Read and write data. So this is what we have here, right? This is what we have imported into our file database. We don't want to worry about writing right now. Right now, we just want to get all the messages that are currently in the database. So what we're going to do is we're going to use a database reference, right? And it doesn't matter. You don't have to set anything up for a reference to work. You're essentially just saying like, if this thing exists in my database, then grab it. And we don't want to use once. We want to use .onValue, which essentially is going to make it so every time that a new chat shows up in our database, it's going to add it to our state and render it out in our app. So we're going to say db.ref. Just one sec. .on. value snapshot. Okay, so essentially what this does is every time that a new value shows up in the database, it's going to grab a snapshot of our database for chats. And this is kind of weird to say because there's currently nothing in the database for us to look at and show you what that would actually look like. But it's basically going to grab that snapshot and it's going to try that's my bad. It's going to say, make a new array with chats just being empty, right? And we're going to say snapshot dot for each. And I'll explain exactly what this does after. I'm just coding it up pretty quickly right now. Chats.push snap.val. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to set the state of chats. So let me hop back to the chat and just see if anyone's having an issue. Okay, if anyone has an issue, feel free to bring it up in the chat. You can also, this is another one of those places where you can just copy and paste the code. And yeah, and we also want to know if there's an error reading from our database. So if there's an error getting these chats, and the way we'll do that is we'll say this dot set state read error null. And I'm going a little bit quick here, but basically this is going to set into state our read error being null in case there was one before, just to make sure that every time that this we try to grab our chats, that it will make sure that if there's a read error that I can figure it out. And we're going to wrap this in a try catch block. Okay, so I'm sure everyone is a little bit confused by exactly what this is doing. Basically, just to run through it one more time, the component's going to mount. It's going to make sure that the read error that we have in our state is null, because we don't want to, like, we couldn't have a read error before we even try to get the chats. Then we're going to try to make a reference to our database and grab chats. And every time that a value gets added to chats, we're going to take that snapshot of our database. Then we're going to make an array that's just an empty array. And this is a method in JavaScript that lets you go through each value in an array. So we're going to go for each value in all of our chats that we just grabbed. We're going to push into the chats array that value, and that's going to add all of our chats. So now we'll have access to the chats, and it still doesn't matter because we don't have a way to submit chats. So we'll go back and we'll want to create a submit method here. So if we go back to the docs, I think it already had something about that. That is very useful for our use case. And write user data, right? So now we're going to do the same thing. We're going to do, and I'm referring to this here, DB, and we want the same ref to chats, only now, and we won't be using set, we'll be using push, right? We'll be using push, and we'll be pushing new information into this chat, right? So when we do this, essentially, we'll be saying event.prevent default, like we saw before, because we don't want to refresh the page. And then we'll say this dot set state write error null, like we did before, because now we're writing to the database. And then we're going to do the same try catch, right? And this isn't going to work because this dbref, you actually have to await it, because this is, I believe, an asynchronous function, right? Because we want to await to see if we're able to get this information. We don't want to set the read error to anything weird or anything weird to happen here. So we come back here and we are going to try And then if we can't do it, we're going to catch the error. And we're going to set write error to be the error.message. Okay, and what we're going to try to do is await db.ref chats .push, and we're going to add from our state the content that we have, right? So we're going to say content this dot state dot content timestamp, so we know when they sent it. And this is a way in JavaScript to grab what time it is right now. Datetime.now or date.now. And finally, we're going to add the user's ID so we know who sent the message. And if that works properly the way that we hope it would, and just going back to the chat, not related to functionality, but how come we don't need a semicolon? Yeah, so we don't need any semicolons. JavaScript doesn't care. JavaScript lets us do whatever we want when it comes to semicolons. It's literally whatever you want. What you'll see though, is there's this thing called Eslint. And if you add it to a project with JavaScript, like if you work somewhere, a lot of the time it'll have something like this. It'll give you errors if you don't style it a certain way, because JavaScript really doesn't care. Like it's very free about the way that you do different things. But as you can see, this is really similar to what we had here. The big difference was that instead of set, we're doing push. And that's because we have a multiple different chats, not a single chat, right? We have an array of different chats. So now we'll save the file and hopefully we'll come back to our app and it will be working. And this is weird. So just send someone random. Permission denied. That's strange. I know why that is actually. Yeah, so the problem with the permission is you need to go to your real-time database, create database, and start in test mode. And this will make it so that you're able to send things into your database now. So for anyone that didn't get that right, I'm going to click enable here, but go to real-time database. There'll be a button that says create database. And then you can just click on it and it will create this database here. And now, if I come back to here and I try to send this message again, it will render my message. And I can send some other stuff. So is everybody else here? Was everybody else able to get this working? And are there any questions? Does anyone have any questions about what I just did in this file? Okay, cool. So Jake was able to get it working. Sweet, sweet. Yeah, sorry, Nicholas. It's always hard because, you know, yeah, if you weren't able to copy the code, all of the code is available in the complete chat. Just go to the corresponding file in complete chat and you can just you can command C and just command V, just rate in and it should work. Exactly what's in these two methods. This is a mirror of complete chat. I just cut out some of the code. But yeah, so essentially the app works now. You know, we're able to have these database references, and obviously that might not have been as clear as I possibly could have been, like just from watching me do it. But I think if you go through on your own and kind of read through this Firebase documentation more, you know, read through the different ways you can read and write data, read through the different ways that you can use user authentication, this is going to make a lot more sense. You know, it's obviously kind of throwing you into the deep end with like a topic like this, but it also does show you what you can build with these tools after you start building up some more knowledge with them. Yes, the database stuff was Firebase stuff, and we can actually look in the database now and we can see our chats, right? So these are all the different chats that we just sent. Firebase is handling all that for us. Firebase is handling our authentication for us. And the React stuff was primarily, or the React stuff was all just the front end components and whatnot, okay? So now I can actually go more, I guess, into how this actual application is structured. Sweet, okay, so we got the chat working. But even before that, actually, I can deploy this so that everybody can mess with it. That would be kind of fun. Let's go ahead and do that. So now that this is in a state where like semi, sort of works, we can go ahead and I'll just show you really quickly how you would do a deployment, right? So there's a couple of different commands that you're going to need. This would be the part where you'll need Firebase, the tools installed, right? So I think it was like npm install -g Firebase -tools if you want to try to do this yourself. But basically what you'll do, and first I'm going to do Firebase Log Out. So this logs me out from whatever account I'm logged in with in Firebase. And that's because I have a couple different ones. Well, they're like, it just depends on what I'm working on. But then I'll do Firebase login. Sure, why not? And I'll select the account that this is associated with. So Amigo Dev Team, allow. It's saying chats is undefined in the compiler. Did you create this let chats equal empty array in the component did mount for chat panel? Ah, yes, okay, yep. So that's your problem. You just got to create that, and then it should work for you because you're trying to set something that doesn't exist. You know what I mean? But yeah, so now we're logged in as Amigo Dev Team, and since we already set up Firebase hosting, what we're going to type in, and I'm going to make this bigger because this is going to be kind of weird in case anyone's trying to do this. Type in Firebase init. And what did we use? Well, you can just go through this and click the spacebar to decide what you use. So we're using database. We're using hosting now. And we are using, I don't even know if we're using Firebase. I don't think so. So better safe than sorry. So we check off these three things, press enter. And now we already have a project set up. So we're going to click use an existing project. And we're going to go skeleton project. And yeah, sure, use database rules.json. What file? Cloud resource location is not set for this project, but the operation you're attempting to perform is a Cloud Firestore. Oh, it's because we aren't using Cloud Firestore that it just broke. That same thing that I was asking myself. Tragic. And yeah, that should be all that we need. What file? Use database rules. Already exists. Yeah, sure, why not? Do you want to use your public directory? So this is important in React, right? You do not have a public directory like this, and we don't need to worry exactly about what this does, but when you want to deploy an app, you actually need to build it into a smaller version of the app and not the version that we're looking at here. So building it essentially just means make it into the most compressed version possible that we can show on the user's computer to make it really quick to load, really easy to work with. And that gets output to a build folder that is not existing here because we've never built this, but it's right here. And as you see, this is just kind of deep, like much smaller than the rest of the stuff that we have. But we're going to say build as our public directory. Yeah, sure, why not? We're going to configure it as that. And now our Firebase initialization is complete. And if we go back to our skeleton chat app, as you can see, there's now a Firebase RC file, and that tells us what project we're deploying this with, and a Firebase JSON that has information about, and that's probably super hard to see, sorry, information about what we're doing. The command in the terminal for this, you can follow along with this if you want. The command in the terminal was a bit of a lot. It's first you have to log in through Firebase, so Firebase login, and then type Firebase init, and you have to fill out this prompt. And if you don't have time right now, we're actually coming really close to the end, and I don't want to take too much of you guys' time. So I'm essentially just gonna finish up with this deployment. We'll see if it works, and if it does, then that's probably gonna be it, because I probably won't have too much time to go over the rest of this. So the initialization is complete, and now we can just do Firebase. We can just do Firebase Deploy, I think. the whole last part of the command line is just for deploying. This isn't doing anything else. And if we're lucky, this will work. Of course it doesn't work. Now it's time to go build something extraordinary. Oh, you know why? Because when I was saying that we have to build a project, yeah, we never actually build. Thanks, Robert. The old forgetting to build a project. So this build, essentially what it's doing is what I said before, just making a really compressed version of it that we're going to be able to throw up on Firebase to host. And this is obviously the fastest and most efficient process ever, which is great. In the meantime, I can actually show you something that I didn't think that I would have time to show you, considering how long this is taking. And this will probably be the last thing that I show. I'm not going to be able to go through the rest of this application, sadly. I just don't think that I will because of the time that we have. But feel free to go through this on your own time. We were able to get people to a point where they had a working app, which is great. We were able to go over how to look in the docs and find different things that you might need to reference the database. We built really simple components that had a state. So I think we got through a ton of stuff. This is obviously getting thrown in the deep end. I don't expect anyone to be able to just go write some React or write these things like outright, but I think you have a good enough, like, or I would hope that you have like an idea of how these different things work, some of the different concepts, so that you can go and try to pick these things up on your time and, you know, on your own time and just look through how some of these different things work. And now let's just see if we can just deploy this. And cool, yeah, so now we have a deployed app. Say, I'm not registered, sign me up. Cool, so let's sign up with any of these emails. Dylan@ahacks.org seems like a cool one. Awesome, so now we have an application that works. And we type in, how are you? And as you can see, this is actually kind of funny, because like these are the messages that I sent from localhost. So now I can kind of talk to myself like, oh, because I already stopped the thing, but like you can, just to show like how the chat would work. This is going to take a long time. I don't think we have time to do all that, but yep, we got the application running. Feel free to look through all of the code on your own time. And thank you guys so much for checking this out and, you know, watching. I really hope that someone was able to learn something. Once again, anyone that wants to use these API keys or anything, they're all going to disappear right after this workshop. Going to delete all of them, make sure no one can access them. So, you know, and be very careful with yours too, because that's really bad if someone gets them. Happens every year at the hackathon. People build scrapers specifically knowing that there's a hackathon and try to get API keys from GitHub. It's really messed up. People don't care. But yeah, I really hope that this is able to help some people. If you want to connect with me, you know, shameless plug. Check me out, you know, any platform, whatever you want. Yeah, so totally, thanks guys. I really hope that this was helpful, and really feel free to message, because I understand that we didn't get to even cover some of the different parts of it, but this was a lot, obviously, and people coming from an introductory background, I really hope that you were able to kind of get like the introductory level of like, how could I even begin learning about these things? What are even like topics that I can enter into? And yeah, I hope that this helps some people get to a place where they feel like they can start learning a little bit more about this.
Thank you so much, Dylan. Really great workshop, everybody.
No, is there really a misspelling?
Yeah, so you've used the wrong your. You'd use the possessive your, but you need to use the WOU apostrophe RE, because it's a conjunction of UR. So, and yeah, that's going in the recording. Awesome.